Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Cavan-Smith. Tonight, a Nairobi court convicts 3 people, 2 Kenyans and a Tanzanian, for their role in helping al-Shabaab extremists in the 2015 Garissa attack, in which 148 people were killed at the university. Also, Benin's public prosecutor threatens to up pressure on former President Boni Yayi. He's been refusing to answer judges questioning his role in clashes that broke out after a controversial parliamentary vote earlier this year. And Burkina Faso's said that 17 people have been killed in an attack on a village in the north. The insecurities across the country forced tens of thousands of people from their homes, part of a growing landscape of conflict linked to global displacement. But first, 3 men have been convicted of helping Somali extremists who carried out one of Kenya's worst ever terror attacks. 2 Kenyans and a Tanzanian were found guilty on Wednesday, and a fourth person was acquitted of involvement with the attack on Garissa University in 2015. 148 people were killed after 4 al-Shabaab gunmen launched a siege on halls of residence over 16 hours and targeted Christian hostages. All the attackers were killed. The country has since tried to get in front of terror-related violence, but has been hit several times since. Julia Steers joins us now with more from Nairobi. Julia, so tell us more about the 3 men who were convicted on Wednesday.
Well, as you said, there were 2 Kenyans. They're Kenyan nationals with Somali backgrounds from the northeast of the country on the border with Somalia. And we know that all 3 of them conspired with the attackers who were killed on the day of the attack, and they were arrested several days after the attack. The judge said today that he knew beyond a reasonable doubt that these 3 men, quote, knew the plot of the attack on that day, but he didn't really explain exactly how they were working with the assailants who were inside the school or how they may have communicated with each other. And lastly, today we heard the prosecutor pushing for the death penalty for these 3 men who were charged today. They're set to be sentenced in early July.
So post-Garissa, has much changed in the way that Kenya approaches security, particularly with regards to threats posed by al-Shabaab?
Well, in the wake of the Garissa attack, Kenyan authorities really took a lot of criticism for the way that they handled it, both in terms of how quickly they responded to the attack and also with how they dealt with the aftermath in terms of dealing with the media and with the families of the victims. So they've been very keen to shed that image over the last few years. There was a terrorist attack here in Nairobi earlier this year. And after that, they were very quick to publicly say how quickly they had responded to that, to highlight the lessons learned from previous attacks like Garissa. In terms of actively fighting al Shabaab, Kenyans are still contributing troops to this African Union led force fighting al Shabaab in Somalia. Now, that's alongside a significantly ramped up US drone program over the last several years. We've also seen here in Kenya, Kenyan authorities responding to threats of terrorism in these Somali Kenyan communities, oftentimes, human rights activists say, with an overuse of force. And that's something that analysts are particularly concerned about because they say there's actually no evidence that this sort of crackdown on these Somali Kenyan communities is doing anything to root out al Shabaab here in Kenya, but rather it could be doing the opposite and helping to foster homegrown extremism, which we saw was the case with these attackers who came from Kenya.
Thanks very much. Julia Steers there for us in Nairobi. Well, in Niger, 2 policemen were killed in Niamey this week in an attack on a police station in northern Niamey. It's the closest raid to the capital yet by suspected religious militants. No one's yet claimed responsibility, though, for the attack. The government suspects extremists are ramping up violence before more forces are deployed ahead of an African Union summit during the country next month. The country is trying to rein in instability caused by extremist groups in the west and Boko Haram Islamists in the south. Well, Burkina Faso said that 17 people have been killed in an attack on a village in the north. The government said it's ramped up security in the wake of Tuesday night's raid on Belehede in the department of Tongomayel. An uptick in violence in the country has been fueled by extremists trying to secure a stronghold across the Sahel. The insecurities forced tens of thousands of people from their homes. It's all part of a growing landscape of conflict-linked global displacement the UN on Wednesday warned is the worst it's ever been.
Earlier this year, Isaka, a wealthy trader, and his extended family fled their village of Silgadi. Along with thousands of others in northern Burkina Faso and central Mali, they were forced out by a resurgence of Islamist violence in the Sahel region.
We were coming back from sowing the fields when they attacked. With that last attack, it was really a case of running for our lives. And as we fled, we lost everything. Our cattle, homes, money, everything. We did not have the time to take anything with us. We arrived in Ouagadougou with just the clothes on our backs. We are struggling and don't have enough to eat and sleep out in the open. We put ourselves in the hands of God and of the authorities.
Once a relatively safe country amidst much turmoil in the Sahel, over recent years Burkina Faso has experienced a spillover of jihadist attacks from Mali. On the 18th of June, 17 people were killed in an attack on the northern town of Belahede. In the last few months, hundreds of people have been killed in the region and more than 150,000 have been forced to flee. With the help of the United Nations, Burkina Faso has set up camps in the north, though refugees staying in the capital, Ouagadougou, are reluctant to leave. UN reports say that West Africa saw a more than 13% increase in refugees and displaced people last year, and that there are more than 6 million refugees in total across the continent.
Well, the International Criminal Court is pushing for Sudan's ruling generals to hand over or prosecute former President Omar al-Bashir. Now, he was toppled in April after 33 years in power, and the negotiations between protesters and the military council that took over after that ouster collapsed after dozens of people were killed in a crackdown on rallies by security forces. On Wednesday, the country's army ruler said that he would be willing to restart talks. Trust, though, will be hard to rebuild. Protest leaders are angry and cautious. There have been international calls for generals to hand over power to civilians.
At the end of the day, the security forces who conducted these raids and led to the killings of the people, and therefore the military council bears responsibility for taking the steps to build and rebuild the trust and confidence that will enable the civilian transition to occur. And a country like Sudan that suffered for 30 years with bad governance, with isolation, with sanctions, with conflict, with economic mismanagement, really needs and deserves better.
Well, Benin's public prosecutors said that they'll be upping pressure on former President Boni Yayi. He's been under house arrest since controversial parliamentary elections in April and has been refusing to answer judges questioning his role in clashes that broke out after that vote. Nicolas Chamau tells us more.
The political climate remains tense in Benin. The public prosecutor said former President Boni Yayi was personally involved in the post-electoral violence last month.
Mr. Boni Yayi refused to answer the judge's questions, despite the fact that he was treated in a courteous manner. This has led the judge to now envisage coercive measures.
This means that he will allow the police to go and fetch Yayi. Twice a judge has gone to the former president's house, but Yayi refused to answer his questions, saying he was unwell. Yayi's lawyers denounced the police presence around his home that has lasted for weeks.
Mr. Boni Yayi remains firm. If the siege of his house continues, if he is not told who gave the order to surround his house, if he is not allowed medical treatment, well then he cannot answer the judge's questions.
Last week there were clashes in central Benin between Boni Yayi's supporters and security forces. Several people were killed. Such violence is very unusual in Benin, which for decades was viewed as one of the most democratic nations in French-speaking Africa. Tensions are high between the current president Patrice Talon and his predecessor, even though they used to be allies. The opposition says Talon has become increasingly authoritarian in recent months.
Well, in Tanzania, people living around a gold mine in North Mara say that they are living at the mercy of the site's operators, Acacia. Guards have been accused of killing and raping locals, And the alleged abuses also extend to police intimidation and extensive environmental pollution. British firm Acacia has denied any wrongdoing.
Here in northern Tanzania, a rural area transformed by the North Mara gold mine. Journalists looking behind its walls have faced threats, censorship, even exile. Local residents, forced off their land, have taken to stealing gold out of desperation, only to face security forces. NGOs say 20 people have been killed here in the last 5 years, a number that the mining company disputes. But residents say they have few other ways of making a living. Lucia was one of them, but she says she stopped after guards repeatedly raped her.
The guards were doing it regularly. When they would catch us, we begged them. We explained that we needed to get into the mine, that we didn't have a choice.
The mine is also a source of more subtle ills. Traces of arsenic and heavy metals have been found in local waterways and held responsible for recurring skin diseases.
We usually receive some patients from the mining area, some with extensive skin disease. They don't care about the people who are living nearby.
The mine's operator, British firm Acacia, says it's working on a new storage tank for the contaminated water. The company was recently handed a €2 million fine by the Tanzanian government, a small fraction of the roughly €450 million worth of gold it mines here every year.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.